So how many people in Europe would be eligible under the law of return to move here?
3 million, 4 million maybe altogether. It could change the geopolitics.
What do you mean that it could change the geopolitics?
You know, the demography is the key of everything, as you know. Between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, this is the borders, 10 million people, about 500,000 Jews and 500,000 Arabs. And if we want to remain a democratic state, we have to have a majority of Jews in this place.
So you think that immigrants could turn the balance?
Absolutely sure. Already we have the birth rate among Arabs is decreasing and the birth rate among Jews is increasing, so it's already a change. The train of history is on its way.
The belief of people of European stock that their nations, their countries, and their cultures, their civilizations are essentially on the chopping block. That their way of life, their values, the societal norms and systems to which they are used and to which under which they wish to live and that they wish to hand down to their children and grandchildren, they believe, and I would agree with them, they believe that their way of life, their identity as people of European stock and people of European descent, and therefore the inheritors of European Western civilization and society, they believe all this is in peril. And this has also been the case in North America for many years now. In Europe in particular, this has accelerated and become a truly enormous crisis for those who wish to see European nations remain exactly what they are, European nations. That is to say, the homelands and the societies for European peoples who wish to remain European, who identify as European, who wish to maintain their cultural heritage, etc. They feel threatened. And again, I reiterate, they are correct to feel so. They are absolutely 100% correct, in my view.
I think there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism because at this point in time, Europe has not yet learned how to be multicultural. And I think we're going to be part of the throes of that transformation, which must take place. Europe is not going to be the monolithic societies that they once were in the last century. Jews are going to be at the center of that. It's a huge transformation for Europe to make. They are now going into a multicultural mode, and Jews will be resented because of our leading role. But without that leading role and without that transformation, Europe will not survive.
What's right now at the top of the agenda for you from within the JCPA?
There are two issues at the top of our agenda at the very moment. One is the unbelievably important immigration debate in this country. To make sure that immigrants from around the world, particularly those from south of our border, have a chance here.
And we are saying, yes, we will love our neighbor. Last week, Hayes organized a letter signed by over 1,200 rabbis. Can you imagine getting 1,200 rabbis to agree on one thing? But agree they did. And what they agreed was to ask our elected officials not to halt or even to limit the United States Refugee Admissions Program. And it's not just Hayes. Jewish organizations of all kinds across the spectrum of Judaism are issuing statements in support of refugees. These have included the Orthodox Union, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and so many of the Jewish organizations that you heard are co-sponsors of this event this evening.
People of European background are looking for those who are responsible, wish to blame, find the people they can blame and attack for what has been going on over, in some cases for decades, in other cases more particularly over the last few years. And it is true, unfortunately, and I think this needs to be frankly admitted by Jews all over the world, that there are, without doubt, Jews involved in those movements and those organizations, very often NGOs, etc., who promote this phenomenon of third world immigration into the Western countries.
At the end of days, you're going to need the iron of Esav, which represents Edom, which is the West, Europe, and the Americas, to get intermixed with Ishmael, which is basically Arabs and Muslims. How in the world was this ever going to happen if not for this refugee crisis? At the end of days, you're going to have this intermixing between Esav, Edom, which is the West, and the East, which is the Muslims and the Arabs, making this through this influx into the world. And they're going to have children, you know, I don't want to say by the dozens, but they're going to have a far larger birth rate than the indigenous people there, and they're going to sort of conquer by number. And there are many different sources for this. One of them in Yehezkel, chapter 14, and many other sources as far as this is concerned, where it's mentioned very, very vividly what will happen to the Jews and what will happen to Yerushalayim and what will happen to the world at that time, where there will be many, many people killed and so on and so forth. So the idea of having these refugees come into Europe, it's no longer a matter of whether it's right or wrong. It's just simply a fulfillment of what it was meant to be all along. This is the fulfillment of, you know, the Chazal and the prophecies. This has to happen, and this is just another sign that we are nearing, you know, the completion of this tikkun of the entire world.
Le Mashiach viendra que quand Edom, l'Europe, la chrétienté sera totalement tombée. Donc je vous pose la question, c'est une bonne nouvelle que l'islam envahisse l'Europe? C'est une excellente nouvelle, ça annonce la venue de Mashiach. Excellente nouvelle. Vous allez le payer très cher, les Européens. Mais à un point, vous n'avez même pas notion de quoi on parle. Et vous n'aurez pas à fuir. Parce que tout le mal que vous avez fait à Israël, vous le paierez au centuple. Quand l'Italie disparaîtra, quand Edom, c'est pour ça que le QG de la chrétienté qui vient de Esav se trouve là-bas, quand cet endroit-là disparaîtra, et c'est ce que veut faire l'islam, il s'occupe. L'islam, c'est le balai d'Israël, sachez-le.
My concern is doing away with whiteness. Whiteness is a form of racial oppression, sure. The suggestion is that it is somehow possible to separate whiteness from oppression, and it is not. There can be no white race without the phenomenon of white supremacy. If you abolish slavery, you abolish slaveholders. In the same way, if you abolish racial oppression, you do away with whiteness. Treason to whiteness is loyalty to humanity.
Your views are fairly well received in academia.
Yes, they're legitimate, not to say that everyone agrees, but sure. I could not point to any examples where it has provoked political censorship. Whiteness is an identity that arises entirely out of oppression. Whiteness is not a culture, it's not a religion, it's not a language, it's simply an oppressive social category.